Nduna lost the Chegutu East constituency, and ZEC admitted to that fact. It is common cause. Everybody is aware of this fact in Zimbabwe. But it is shocking that even as we speak, Dexter Nduna remains the member of parliament for Chegutu East, when it is common cause that he actually lost the election. And it begs the question, how is it possible, in the interest of justice, that someone who is known to have lost an election continues to sit in parliament and represent voters who rejected him? Why is it possible that such a situation is obtaining? If you unpack that and understand its implications, then it should not be difficult for you to understand that a ZEC and a judiciary that allows such a situation that is blatantly unfair, blatantly wrong, can do worse, can steal a presidential election. It can also steal a parliamentary election well after the fact. And for you to understand, and this is very important for Zimbabwe, if you want to appreciate not only what is possible, but in fact what is happening, you need a case. You need a real live, a living example of blatant illegality, blatant injustice and unfairness. So forget about looking at the presidential election in terms of Nelson Chamisa, and forget for a moment looking at the injustice around the MPs who are being recalled, and just look at Chegutu East. Why is it that the situation in Chegutu East is not driving Zimbabweans to outrage? Why is it that the Zimbabweans, and in particular civil society and the media, and of course the political parties themselves, especially the affected political party, why are they not using the Chegutu East situation to show that ZEC and the judiciary, when it comes to elections, are determined to ensure that this consent question in Zimbabwe remains unresolved? Now, what is, I think, crucial to understand about this part of the problem is that while there are various manifestations of the crisis in Zimbabwe, and while all of them footnote the country's 6 unresolved questions that I outlined, from a consent point of view, it is important to underline that the pervasive cause of the crisis that we have in our country today, the fundamental cause, the fundamental reason why Zimbabwe is under the grip of this crippling crisis is because of the disenfranchisement of the voter. It is because of the disenfranchisement of the voter in violation of a fundamental pillar of the Constitution, which is provided in section 67(3), the right to vote. Section 3(1) of the Constitution that deals with the founding values and principles provides for recognition and respect for the liberation struggle as one of the 9 key founding values and principles, not just of the Constitution itself, but of Zimbabwe, of the Republic of Zimbabwe. And there are 2 grievances of the liberation struggle that stand out if we recognize the liberation struggle. One is the right to vote. Two is the return of the land to the indigenous population. But in this case, the important one is the right to vote. As much as people might want to keep coming up with all sorts of pretentious and self-serving definitions of the crisis in Zimbabwe, the unavoidable bottom line is that the crisis in the country is defined by the consent crisis, triggered by an electoral system in which there is no relationship between the vote cast and the vote counted. This is reflected by the unjust outcomes of the votes that were cast in the 2018 presidential elections, as well as, and this is scandalously so, as well as the parliamentary votes cast in that election for the MDC. Regarding the 2018 presidential elections, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, ZEC, tabled its report in Parliament on 27 June 2019. And this was in accordance with Section 241 of the Constitution, in which it made clear, not by design, it was by mistake, that it did not run and conduct the 2018 presidential poll in accordance with the peremptory provisions of Section 37C, subsection 4, and Section 110 of the Electoral Act. This fact stands alone. It is irrelevant for people to say, oh, but this was decided by the Concord. The fact of the matter is ZEC is a Chapter 12 constitutional body, and it has a constitutional duties to perform. And one of these duties is to report to Parliament as to how it ran an election. And in its report, it makes clear, not in any ambiguous way, it makes clear that it did not run the presidential election in accordance with the must do, the must follow provisions of the election. In other words, ZEC itself, yes, after the Concord made this decision, comes up and says, look, Parliament, we did not run the election legally, and we did not run it legally by using a transmission method of transmission or process of transmitting the results, which is not provided in the law. We invented our own way of transmitting the results from the ward to the National Command Center. We circumvented all the other steps and went straight from the ward to the National Command Center in Harare and counted the presidential ballots in Harare, compiled them in Harare. We did not compile these ballot papers at the constituency centers as we are required. And they did not travel from constituency centers to provincial centers as the law requires. No, we did not do that. But we just told the ward officers to send them to us in Harare, and then we compiled them. There's no provision in the law which says take them to Harare and compile and collect them there and then come up with the result. Now, I'm very surprised that despite this disclosure, and despite the fact that this disclosure is in a ZEC report which was prepared and submitted to Parliament in terms of the Constitution, in fulfillment of a constitutional obligation, Zimbabweans are quiet. And those who are noisy, on behalf of those who stole the election, are saying, we don't want to hear about that because the Concord decided in Chief Justice Malava we trust, and what he said is what stands, and it's finished. This is shocking. That is an unbelievable point of crisis. And this is one feature of the Zimbabwean society which is different from our neighbors. No one can imagine this happening in South Africa, in Zambia. Certainly, for all the things we used to think about our brothers and sisters in Malawi, that cannot happen in Malawi. You cannot have an electoral body confessing to a crime, confessing to an illegality, and you keep quiet. That is about the presidential election. What we should keep in mind is that the consent question requires that there be a functional direct relationship between votes cast and votes counted. And if the votes cast are transmitted illegally and collected illegally, then there is no relationship. It does not matter what the Constitutional Court says. And who then is the victim? The victim is the voter. I detail this in Excelgate. I've seen lots of stories and so forth, but I will urge you, don't listen to the political debates and the propaganda. Citizens have to take responsibility for their positions, for their values, moral values, for their political positions. And insofar as the question of consent is about the citizen in general and the voter in particular, then it behooves you to inform yourself as to what happened to the vote that you cast in relation to the presidential election. And I think that we should demand, citizens should demand that the ZEC report be made public. Why is it not being disseminated? Why is Ziambi hiding that report? In fact, Ziambi has a constitutional obligation to educate the people of Zimbabwe on the Constitution, on the provisions of the Constitution, and you don't educate them by reading the Constitution as if you're reading the Bible. It's a living document that regulates the interactions of society. A major interaction is about how the votes were cast. That report not only should be made public, it should be translated into the languages that are provided in the Constitution. What happened in terms of how ZEC treated the presidential ballot was an abuse. And yes, there have been concerns and issues about election rigging in Zimbabwe. Some of us have written books about some of the elections and so forth, and the debates continue. But what happened in 2018 in terms of ZEC's handling of the presidential ballot is not only scandalous and criminal, but also unprecedented in our election history. And to imagine that this happened on the back of a new constitution with electoral reforms. People like to talk about electoral reforms, but people should remember that the most important electoral reforms were done, and they are in the constitution that was adopted in 2013. But ZEC, in broad daylight, violated the provisions of that constitution, and ZDF used violence to back up the violation, and the Constitutional Court used the authority that it derives from the people to endorse that violation, which violation amounted to a theft. Now, it would be wrong to say, forget about this. It's water under the bridge. It's 2 years after the fact. Let us now look ahead toward the 2023 elections. No, correct it. The most important electoral reform that Zimbabweans must do, should do in the interest of constitutional democracy, is to correct the 2018 illegality. If you go for 2023 without correcting the 2018 illegality, you are guaranteed to have worse of the same. In fact, it will be more of the worst of the same. Now, the right to vote, which was violated in regard to the presidential election, and which is the underlying reason why there is a crisis in Zimbabwe today, is entrenched, as I mentioned earlier, in section 67.3 of the Constitution. It is important for us, it is important for the population, for that matter, to familiarize itself with this provision, because this is the provision behind the current crisis in the country. Section 67.3 provides that every Zimbabwean citizen who is of or over 18 years of age has the right to vote in all elections and referendums to which this constitution or any other law applies, and to do so in secret. And further, it provides that every Zimbabwean citizen who is of the 18 years of age has the right to stand for election for public office. It's the voter who has the right to stand for public office, and if elected, to hold such office. It's not the political party, it's not the Secretary General of a political party, especially of a dubious political party created by the Supreme Court. It is not the acting president of any political party created by the Supreme Court. It is the voter who has that right. And this right is enshrined in the Bill of Rights. It is a fundamental right, not given to anybody, and there is no limitation under this provision. No limitation to say, except where the political party comes and comes up with a story to say, oh, this one is no longer representing our interests and so forth. This right is given like this with no limitation. Now, it is important that regarding the recall of MDCA MPs, reliance has been on section 129(1)(k) of the Constitution. And that section provides, it deals with the tenure of the Member of Parliament, and it provides that the tenure or seat of a Member of Parliament becomes vacant if the member has ceased to belong to the political party of which he or she was a member when elected to Parliament. So, if you were a member of a political party when you were elected and you cease to be a member of that political party, then your seat becomes vacant. End of story. It's really not something that is supposed to have some Secretary General running around writing a letter to say, oh, you have ceased to be a member of a political party. You cease to be a member of a political party if you resign or you are expelled. If you resign, it's you taking the action to resign. If you are expelled, it's a process, some due process in terms of the constitution of your party to put you discipline and so forth. The first thing that must happen and be known by the public is that you have ceased to be a member of a political party. It's not that the people will be there just enjoying themselves, minding their business, and suddenly somebody announces that so-and-so, excuse me, listen to me, so-and-so is no longer a member of the House. And in the cases where this has happened in recent manifestations of this problem, you have heard either a Speaker of Parliament or President of Senate surprising even the affected member. Now, if someone is no longer a member of a party, either because they've resigned or they have been expelled, they should be the first to know. And they will be the last to go to Parliament to say, I've come in to sit here. But if you are in Parliament and the Speaker from the Blues announces that you are no longer a member of Parliament, when you know you have not ceased to be a member of your party,
Are you still there, Prof, or there is something happened to your connection? We seem to have lost the professor there. I'm not sure what's going on. So I'm hoping that he's in, or his network has disconnected. So just give me a minute. I'll try and check what's going on. This is a lecture with the Professor Jonathan Moyo, where he was talking a number of issues, or what he calls, he points out some of the issues, the unresolved issues in the Zimbabwean crisis, but we seem to have lost him there. Just give me a minute. I try and check. Prof, are you there? Okay, let me try and see whether we can get him back to conclude and also answer the questions. There were a number of questions that people had sent in here, and that would have loved him to answer, but I'm not sure what happened there. So like someone who's hiding, maybe he lost the network in his bunker there. I'm trying to up him and check whether or send him a Twitter message and find out. So just give me a minute and see if I can get him. Okay, I have talked to him, and he's saying he's getting back shortly. So he just got disconnected, and he's sorting out so that he can be connected. So when he comes, we'll try and get him to conclude, then get him to answer some of the questions. So we have quite a number of questions that people had asked, and we would like him to answer those questions. So we are waiting for him to connect, because he says he has lost connection, and he is working on connecting back. So I hope that it won't be long. So for now, just hold on, and he comes in, he concludes, then we can get a chance to ask him those with questions. I saw quite a number of people had posted questions on the land issue. Some were asking about the elections, whether there's any use of going on elections. Other people were asking what he has changed since he left office, because he was part of the system, and all those kind of things. So just give me a minute, and I hope that he's going to come back. My name is Zanzer Ndebele. This is the Center for Innovation and Technology site. So for now, while you're waiting for Professor, you can like us on Facebook, follow our page, CITEZW on Facebook, or you can also follow us on Twitter as site. And hope that the Professor is going to join us shortly. we're hoping that is not going to have permanent problems. So just give us a minute and we try and get him connected. Prof, are you back? Prof, are you back?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, you can continue.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my apologies. I don't know what happened, but I'm winding down. So I
I'm not sure whether you are you on? We seem to be seeing you talking. But
now I okay, so the instructive and concerning issue is that section 129 1K that I was referring to, by basically giving the political party the power to undo the outcome of an election, imposes a limitation on section 67(3) of the Constitution. It creates a clash that is inconsistent with the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the entrenched part of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is the mother of the Constitution. And with respect to the right to vote, the Constitution does not limit it within the Bill of Rights. It puts it there as a fundamental pillar. It puts the right to vote, as it does indeed other rights, as an entrenched feature of the Constitution. If you start limiting it or imposing limits on it, if you cripple the Constitution becomes unrecognizable. The Constitution becomes something else. When it comes to constitutional democracy, if we were to put a hierarchy of rights as the most important and which are careful, if you are going to touch them, you must be careful. It has to be the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to vote. The right to vote is the preservation of all these rights in a constitutional democracy. The right to vote is the foundation of a democratic government. The right to vote is the material by which the people exercise the authority that has been vested in them by the Constitution. It is an important right. It cannot be taken away by a political party which is not covered in Section 67(3). And there is a problem in Zimbabwe that, unfortunately, this limitation which is imposed on the right to vote is in fact in the Constitution. It is not in some subsidiary legislation, it's in the Constitution. However, if we had a progressive judiciary, they would have realized that this provision of Section 129(1)K was smuggled onto the Constitution by politicians who run political parties who wanted, in their blindness, to control members, their members of the parliament, and they thought that they could just get away with it by putting it in the Constitution. And quite frankly, I think that here is evidence of drafters who also went to sleep. But if there is one disservice that has been done to the people of Zimbabwe by the constitution making process, it was to come up with Section 129(1)K, which gives the political party the power to undo the right to vote, to limit the right to vote, which right belongs to every Zimbabwean, not every political party and not every political leader. Clearly, there's no rational or legitimate connection between the limitation that Section 129(1)K imposes on Section 67(3) and the right to vote. There's nothing. It is just a mafia-like political trick that found its way in the Constitution, but which trickery would have been flushed out if we had a progressive bench. There is also no rational objective or reasonable justification based on equality, fairness, openness, which is set out in Section 86 of the Constitution as among the grounds, legitimate grounds for limiting a right. This Section 129(1)K is not imposing a limitation on the right to vote based on equality, fairness, openness. It is actually based on the opposite of these things. And the limitation also, normally, if you have a limitation, it would have to be of a general application. This one cannot be said to be of general application. Laws that are designed for special application violate the principle of equality and the rule of law. This provision, in fact, damages a fundamental pillar by violating the principles of equality and rule of law. In fact, this limitation that has been used to recall the MPs, yes, it's in the Constitution, but it is so blatantly, so fundamentally flawed and wrong to assume that when the voters elect a member of parliament, they must belong to the political party that they have, whose member they are voting for. There's no such a suggestion that when voters vote for an MP, in fact, they are members of the political party for the MP they are voting for, in order for them to exercise their constitutional right to vote. And therefore, if there were such members, then perhaps it would be reasonable for them to suffer the limitation which is associated with their freedom to belong to a political party or a party of their choice. But there's no such a suggestion. We know, in fact, that many political parties have far fewer members than their voters out there. People vote on the basis of what they think the member or person they are voting for will do for them, will do for their constituency. In fact, they never vote thinking or wondering what the political party of that member is going to do for them. It is always about the member. And that is why also voting is by secret ballot and not by party dictates. The secret ballot is free from party choices. The voter has the right to vote against a candidate from his or a political party. So such a constitutionally entrenched right, like the right to vote, cannot be, or at least should not be, subject to the limitation of a party choice or a party affiliation, which is entirely irrelevant and without a place in the conduct of voting by secret ballot. And it is very instructive that the party, or in fact not party, the individuals who have used or relied on this totally unacceptable limitation provision are people who call themselves members of a movement for democracy or a movement for democratic change. This provision that they've relied on is the biggest threat you can imagine, the biggest obstacle you can come up with against democracy. This is not a provision for democracy by any stretch of the imagination. That's why, in terms of the right to vote, all elections that are in the Constitution are based on universal adult suffrage on a common voters' roll. They are not based on a party affiliation. They are based on an open voters' roll, a universal adult suffrage principle. And this is what the liberation struggle was about. It was about getting universal adult suffrage on a common voters' roll. It was about getting majority rule on the basis of the vote. It was about ensuring that the vote comes before independence, that there would be or should be no independence before majority rule or before the exercise of that vote. So the power to recall MPs conflicts with the right and freedom to belong to a political party of one's choice, in relation to which no one should have to be penalized or suffer consequences. And the recall of MDCA MPs, as I indicated at the start, amounts to taking away the vote. It is doing to the voter an offense worse than anything that the colonialists did. And it is shocking that this is being done by people who claim to be members of the Movement for Democratic Change, working, colluding, conspiring with people who claim to have gone to the bush to fight for the right to vote. They went to the bush to fight for the right to vote. So they tell us. We just discovered recently that there were some other stockholder stuff they want to talk about and so forth, and But what we all know, what is in the Constitution, which enjoins Zimbabweans to respect the liberation struggle, is that it was fought for the right to vote. This is what was denied to the African people in Zimbabwe, the right to vote, the basis for consent. Now, when you get liberators and Democrats conniving to take away the right to vote, all hell should break loose. And someone from us watching and looking at this, we wonder to say, but what are these people in this country? What are they doing? Why do people sit there and pretend that the recall of MPs is a problem for Wende, the Secretary General of the MDCA, is a problem for Chamisa, is a problem for the MDCA? And you hear people debating other stuff. Let us have a GNU. Let us have an NTA. And yet they don't understand or see that what is wrong is a fundamental attack on the most important feature and the pillar of the Constitution in terms of democratic and constitutional governance, which is the right to consent. The consent question, which is based on the right to vote. Why are people not agitating around this? When and how are Zimbabweans going to settle the question about the means for getting into power, the means for exiting power? Do Zimbabweans think that they will always resolve the question for getting into power through mediation by external forces, through facilitation by external forces? Do Zimbabweans think that they will govern best through forced GNUs, through forced NTAs? When a voter makes a wrong decision, so to speak, in terms of the performance of whoever they would have voted for, that is democracy. You cannot justify corrupting the democratic process on grounds that you don't like the people or the persons who have voted for, especially when or if you did not submit or subject yourself to the elections. So this is a fundamental question, and this is, in my view, a very important question, because if Zimbabwe cannot respect the right to vote, if Zimbabweans cannot fight and defend the right to vote by ensuring that votes cast are the same as votes counted, how then do they expect the system or anyone to respect the individual as a citizen? How then do they expect the state, the regime, to respect the worker, to respect the civil servant, and the journalist? Is it any wonder that we see some of these things that are happening? Wasn't it the idea that after all the dark experience of the independence, I would say most of the independence period, some want to tell us since 1999 or 2000, but Gugrahundi, the atrocity of all atrocities that have been committed in Zimbabwe, the genocide, was 1980 to 1987. Electoral atrocities, some say they want to talk about 2000, but 2008. But people who have studied elections in Zimbabwe know about atrocities in 1985. What happened to ZAPU in 1985? But if you are not going to fight for the most fundamental right, which is the right to vote, how are you going to fight for the journalist, the nurse who has been on strike, the doctor, and the consumer? How about the student, the farmer, and the traditional leader? Basically, how about the parent, the businessman, the investor? If you want to unleash the creative energies of society, you've got to start in the beginning. It's no wonder we have this web of confusion, in the description of the crisis. It's because people want to be even partisan in the definition of the crisis. People want to define the crisis as ZANU-PF, as MDCA, as civil society, as independence. We've got to describe the crisis as citizens, and we've got to defend those things that are entrenched in the Constitution for the protection of everyone. If it becomes possible that no institution, no person can corrupt the right to vote, that an electoral system reflects the vote cast, then Zimbabwe will put the issue of these 6 conflicts that have been with the nation for the last 6 years, 40 years behind, all of them, because the resolution of all those questions depend on the exercise of the right to vote, which is the consent question. And when these neighbors come, it is not what the elite think or want. They've done that before, and the outcome is therefore all to see. For a change, the resolution of the Zimbabwean crisis should be guided by the resolution of the basic questions, the basic issues that have been corrupted, especially over the last 3 years, and in particular and fundamentally correcting the outcome of the 2018 election. I don't know why people don't see that the recall of the MPs is to change the result of the election, and to change it in such an outrageous way, where losers, outright losers, not narrow, small losers by an arm and a leg, big time losers, shamelessly are going to parliament today. Changing. If the logic of what is happening is that the MDC alliance, which campaigned everywhere, registered everywhere, presented itself to the voters everywhere, actually did not win a single constituency.
Prof, I just wanted to come in shortly there and announce to people who are watching that we are getting news that journalist Hopewell Chingono has been released on a 10,000 bail. So that is good news to Hopewell and to all of us who were really worried that Hopewell has been in jail for quite a while. Probably that's the end of his case, but it ends on a good note that he has been granted 10,000 bail. We know earlier on Jacob Ngarivume was also given a $50,000 bail. For now, I don't have the finer details, whether he was, such bail conditions, you'll be told not to use your social media handle and report to the police 3 times a day and so forth and so on. But finally, Hopewell gets bail. Maybe you can just go on. I was too excited to hold on to the good news.
We share your excitement. And of course, the abnormality is that we're celebrating a release of someone who should not have been arrested in the first place and detained. But great to have him back. And on that note, I conclude this part of my presentation by making the point that the foundation of a good society begins with the respect of the voter by ensuring that the votes cast correspond with the votes counted. Zimbabwe has systematically failed to do this, and it has failed not because it cannot do it, but because those with power don't want it to be done. And it will be corrected only and only when the Zimbabweans take it to themselves and insist, as have done others in our neighborhood, that the right to vote must be respected. The crisis in Zimbabwe will not be resolved until this issue is addressed. It is important because it is the gateway to power. It is the process, structure, and means by which power is attained and by which it is retained and lost. I can't imagine any discussion that will come and then the elite agree. Meanwhile, the voter in Cholocho, Mzarabani, Honde Valley, Kezi or Plumtree knows how they voted, knows that the outcomes that are presented to them have nothing to do with their consent, that they did not consent to this. We should not, 40 years after independence, teach ourselves, teach our children, institutionalize a culture that says your vote does not count, your vote does not matter. The implications manifest themselves in the economic crisis and political crisis that we have seen unfolding in our country, not for the first time. What makes it worse in this particular case is that you have a government which takes pride. It takes pride in its inability to think. It is ideologically bankrupt. It is intellectually bankrupt. For the first time, we have a government that doesn't even argue its case in public. People have forgotten who is who in terms of the ministers, because you don't see or hear them say anything. They are in hiding. They are taking advantage of coronavirus to isolate themselves. They are in isolation. You think there is no government. You see a government taking a drastic step, like we saw yesterday, of reversing the land reform program, and the minister of land who is signing was anxiously appointed only last week. And you know he has not exercised his mind on this question, but he's already signing away the land. And is doing this with a minister of finance who has shown that because he has no political base, he does not care. All he will do is use his futurist tools. There is no discussion, there is no conviction to say, here is what we want to do, and we are doing it for these reasons. Ask yourself why that is so. It's because the authority in power did not derive the consent from the voter. Whenever you have any ruling authority which is not in power on the basis of the consent of the voter, then prepare yourselves for what we have seen. And it is for this reason that I strongly believe and submit that the crisis in Zimbabwe is the consent question stupid. I thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for that interesting talk. I have a few questions here that I'm going to ask you. The first one says, has the state been captured and privatized? If so, how do we, if so, how do you create space for consent in civil participation? I think I read that. I mean, I hope I read it correctly. Let me just repeat it. It says, has the state been captured and privatized? If so, how do we create spaces for consent building and civic participation in such a state?
Well, I think that over the last 2-3 years, because of the debates in South Africa about state capture, we have been importing this concept in Zimbabwe. And those who have used it up to this point have really not shown the rigor that one would expect. But increasingly, of late, a fair analysis or observation of the situation in Zimbabwe would have to acknowledge, or at least deal with the fact that Sakunda and Kuda Tabgire have come out as instruments of state capture. They have been given unlimited access to the most critical resources in the country, from fuel to agricultural inputs, and incredibly, even taking over state mines, gold mines, and of course the claim is that they are buying them, but we know, for example, that the acquisition of shares at CBZ and the purchase of the most lucrative gold mines of ZMDC was through a $500 million that came from Treasury. And that would be an example of state capture. It's like a one person, one company patronage economy, which may not be quite the same as state capture. This is actually blatant daylight robbery that has been going on. Now, if people ask, but how do you deal with that? In the context of this debate or presentation, I'm putting the emphasis on the voter and giving very clear instances to do with the presidential election in 2018 and the recall of the MDC MPs. And I think that it's not difficult to see what should the citizens do, what should the voter do to defend and protect their vote. And when people talk about political reforms and electoral reforms, this is where they should start. Start by correcting what happened yesterday so that you make room for a better tomorrow.
There's also someone was talking about the question that there is this talk about the talks South Africans coming to Zimbabwe as first of all from an ANC point of view and from a government point of view. And there was someone who was writing a very long question, but the simple of it was saying, is the G40, is the ANC government also going to engage the G40 element?
I don't know what the G40 element is. You know, you are not who your detractor says you are. You are who you are. Of course, like other Zimbabweans, am aware that there's this phrase that keeps coming. I think let us be practical. Quite frankly, there is no political formation in Zimbabwe called G40. If there is, I'm not aware of it. But there are former ministers in the government that was led by the late president who are in exile. Quite a number of them are in South Africa. They are entitled to their political rights as Zimbabweans. And because they were former ministers and leaders in ZANU-PF at the time, clearly they have contacts with members of the ANC, and they can engage them as anyone else who is in the same position would, and that engagement does not translate to anything called G40. Freedom of association, freedom of engagement, whether through expression or whatever means, we must respect and fight for all of us, for everybody. But that should not lead. You see, one of the problems with the Zimbabwean crisis is that people come up with things they think or things they have heard. I'm afraid, in terms of the public discourse in Zimbabwe, it's never about rigorous arguments. It's always about stigmatization. You are this or you're that. Very few people are called by the names they call themselves or the labels they use for themselves. It's given allocated labels, and they confuse the situation. You end up imagining things. And I think when there was a letter that was said to have been written by G40 members to the ANC, some people started looking at that in political terms as, implying that either there is a formation or there is a desire by some of the people or all of the people who wrote the letters to join ZANU-PF and so forth. No, nothing like that. But, the ANC is a mature and experienced organization, and we should not ascribe to it some of the things we do. And as part of that maturity, they will be interested in hearing from former ZANU-PF members and former government ministers to help them understand what is going on. They may ask questions about ZANU-PF today. Remember, some of the people who are in ZANU-PF are the same, not all, but some who were there before the coup. So that could be the context. I certainly would do that if I were in the ANC and I'm planning to engage ZANU-PF as they are planning to do. I would definitely reach out if the members in question are accessible to former ministers and so forth. And I think this is what is happening, and we should not read too much into it.
Yeah, you talked a bit about, a lot about elections. There's someone who says, is there merit to the argument that the opposition is simply failing to reach rural areas or mobilize the rural folk in the same way ZANU-PF does?
Yeah. I will make my comment on this question, but it is not what I was talking about. Because what I was talking about is the right of the voter and the fact that the voter, the rural voter, as well as the urban voter, had their votes stolen. Their votes were not counted with respect to the presidential election, and that their votes are being stolen as we speak. Their votes are being stolen by the recall of the MDCA MPs. Now, if someone then asks me, is the opposition having difficulties reaching the rural areas? That person is a victim of ZANU-PF propaganda and is raising a question without any empirical base, because what would that person say if they are shown that actually the rural voter voted for Nelson Chamisa in 2018? I mean, that kind of mentality is what plays into the hands of ZANU-PF and makes it possible for them to steal the vote, because you are already assuming with no evidence that there's something that the opposition has not done or didn't do. You know what? One of the things about the voter is that wherever they are, even if you don't reach them, especially in a general election, especially an election such as was held in 2018, they can vote their choices, even if that the particular political party you think needs to go to the rural areas didn't go there. One thing that the Zimbabwean voter has overcome is the intimidation when they are inside the ballot box. The Zimbabwean voter has learned that during the election campaign, they can take whatever you are offering them, mealie meal, cooking oil, soap, they will take, but forget about that on the day they are voting in the ballot box. So this narrative that has been going on about the opposition not going to the rural areas is okay. Is okay, public debate, but it doesn't tell us anything about how the voters have actually voted. There is quite some serious evidence which shows that certainly with respect to the 2018 election, rural voters did not vote for Emmerson Mnangagwa.
My two last questions. The first one says, it looks like the opposition is surrounded and they are losing MPs in parliament and they're outplayed. So the question is, what can they do? Then the second question is, you have painted a picture that we're really in trouble, and someone even says, it looks like Zimbabwe is a deep state and these tentacles encroaching into opposition politics. So what is the solution for an ordinary Zimbabwe?
Sorry, the first one was...
The first one, it says the opposition seems surrounded and they've really literally, or the person says the opposition is surrounded and they've literally given up. What can they do?
Well, I'm not sure that the person is correct in thinking the opposition have become so surrounded that they are now helpless, unable to do anything, or that maybe from an objective point of view, when people look at the situation, the conclusion is that there's nothing that they can do. The current situation in Zimbabwe is, from many perspectives, if you were to look at it critically, an opposition's gold mine. It is unfortunate and a bit difficult to understand why the opposition in Zimbabwe appears to be preoccupied with opposing itself. I don't think the presumption that it is surrounded and has little room to maneuver is empirically correct. What is clear in the post-coup period is that politicians seem to have taken the view that each and everyone must have their own general, have their relationship with the army, and so forth. People are afraid. And I think it is also clear that in the run-up to the coup, people were compromised. I mean, the question is, so they seem to be surrounded, what should they do? Meanwhile, we also have press reports, and I'm sure this is something that is subject to verification, that a leading member of the opposition in Bulawayo province worked with the state against a citizen. That doesn't paint a picture of a surrounded opposition, unless the idea of being surrounded is that the state has deployed its co-optation systems all over the place. It is compromising and buying opposition people. So I think, objectively speaking, if you are in opposition, I think the Zimbabwean opposition, yes, we should understand. We have a new, many people say, but the army has always been there and so forth. Yes, but not as open as it is, where you know, it's literally the army is you know, dictating things even in the streets, and not just offices and boardrooms. And when people see these guys in uniform carrying weapons, I'm sure it changes the psychology of opposition. And they've killed people in the streets. They've followed people in their houses. They've sexually assaulted women, raped them, and so forth. I think we have to factor in the real possibility of new levels of fear never before seen. Otherwise, there's no alternative for the opposition than to oppose, and to oppose bravely. I mean, the fact that you were sharing with us good news that Hopewell and Jacob, of course, have been released on bail today, is full of lessons for what the opposition can do, should do. In any other environment, it would have been the opposition showing the sort of bravery. But of course, Jacob is in the opposition. I think the feeling that things are not going our way, and we are surrounded, may be understandable but misplaced, because what the opposition needs to do is to oppose, and oppose, and oppose, with the view of taking power, not to oppose, of course, for the sake of opposition, but for you know. And I think 40 years after independence, and after the ouster of President Mugabe, after his death, one thing I think we can say, what analysts can say, is that, and this is for the opposition, ZANU-PF was conceived in Highfield in 1963. And it grew up in the bush. And it's clear that it's going to be, before it grew up in the bush, you know, I mean, it was conceived in Highfield, but born in Gweru, in the Midlands. It was born there, and then grew up in the bush, came back with lots of bush stuff and so forth. Attempts to try and cleanse it of the bush stuff were difficult. But now it's clear that it's dying in the Midlands, where it was born, and it will be buried there.
That's quite an interesting one. There's someone says this is an urgent question, because I said it was going to be my last. He says, why does the professor only allege or speak of rigging that happened in 2018 and not the rigging that happened before 2018 when he was in the office?
In which the one in which way?
He says you are only talking about the rigging in 2018. Why not the rigging before 2018?
Which year before 2013? You know, I've written stuff. I mean, this is, I'm not sure whether this is a person who follows, but I wish I could know which year. But there's a simple thing. First of all, if you read Excelgate, it talks about all elections, not just 2018. So this is someone who hasn't read Excelgate. It even draws parallels between certain things which were done in 2018 and 2013. You know, one of the things that is in Excelgate is how I was a victim of rigging myself in 2013, even as I was participating in those elections. So I think that I would like to extend an invitation to the person who says this is an urgent question to read Excelgate. They will find that all elections are covered. I had published about elections before, and they also found that I cover not just the 2017 coup, but 6 coups, 6 others. Well, perhaps attempted ones, so to speak, since the 2017 one is the only one that succeeded. I don't understand why it is why some compatriots find it easy to raise questions on the basis of what they feel, as opposed to on the basis of what they know.
Then there's this one. I mean, I promise this will be the last. It has been a long afternoon. He's saying Emmerson Mnangagwa was the vice president during Mugabe's time, and did he learn anything didn't he learn anything while he was vice president? And he also says, were you involved in the removing of Mujuru and actually campaigning for Emmerson Mnangagwa?
Well, I think what is significant about Mnangagwa is not whether he learned or did not learn anything as vice president. I mean, he was, by President Mugabe's own description, he was the right-hand man of the former president. I mean, he was his closest aide. I don't know whether the person expects that he would have learned something good, but when you're dealing with a public figure like Emmerson, I think the question really is not whether he learned anything, but why he managed to become president. And it's not surprising that his entry had to be the bazooka. He had no other entry. He probably learned that when all else fails, use the gun. And he continues to do that. The one consistent but very negative feature about Emmerson is that from day one, he's a security man. He's a man of violence who, over the years, has boasted about it and said to the nation, I was trained to kill. He told the nation that he was trained to kill. In one of the heated Politburo meetings when I presented the documentary on their Blue Ocean strategy, the second time when we now we're discussing the presentations and it made this, and then I was detailing all sorts of things about him to challenge his claim that he was the most loyal to President Mugabe. He got very angry with me. And he was seated next to President Mugabe, on President Mugabe's right side, and pointed at me and said to me, people like you, we used to separate their heads from their necks. And when he was asked in one of the interviews, after he became after he was imposed as president, he was asked this very same question: "What have you learned?" And he said he had learned to be humble. And he said he had learned that since becoming president. And he said, otherwise, all these years, I never used to take nonsense. So he thinks that humility is taking nonsense, which of course it isn't. The bottom line is that many people in ZANU-PF who know Mnangagwa never thought he will ever be president or succeed Mugabe. President Mugabe himself never thought that Mnangagwa would succeed him. He was the most surprised person to hear Mnangagwa on the phone saying, I'm coming there, the voice of the people is the voice of God, so you get out of status, I'm coming in. Mugabe was surprised, shocked. It was an unbelievable turn of events that Mnangagwa, and many people in ZANU-PF who never thought that Mnangagwa would not become president because of his violent background as a security man and his corrupt history in the party as the Secretary for Finance, but mainly the violence. Many of them who thought, therefore, he won't become president are not surprised by the ferret forces that are there now. They are not surprised by his law and order philosophy. They are not surprised that he has brought his cronies like Owen Muda, Isaac Moyo, Thomas Moyo, and that Thomas Moyo, who is the commander of defense intelligence, is a Guguraundi man. And Mnangagwa has reassembled his Guguraundi network and then brought the Mashurugi connection. The younger ones are Mashurugi, the older ones are Guguraundi. And they are a deadly mixture together. And nobody is surprised. So you can't ask, did he not learn anything? There was nothing to learn. He's practicing what he has been in any other normal society. Mnangagwa would not have become president. But of course, as I said, we all know he became president via a coup. And in 2018, Mnangagwa was not elected. And this is an objective assessment. And for me, it's surprising, as I indicated in the presentation, that people are not exercised by this, because all they need to do is interrogate the work of ZEC. So that is the thing about Mnangagwa. But this deep state stuff, there's no deep state in Zimbabwe. I mean, this is a mafia state, patronage. It's put together, held together by violence and patronage. And you can't call it a deep state. One of the things that has happened in Zimbabwe, and I alluded to this in the presentation, is that the best of Zimbabwean skills have left the country. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why it is challenging to solve the national crisis. It is almost, if you remove people like me, who were forced into exile by guns and grenades, the majority of Zimbabweans, if not all of them, who are out of the country, have left first because they have good quality skills that they can use to advance their careers and be commensurately remunerated elsewhere, or the meltdown, the economic situation is forcing a lot to cross the border to go to South Africa. But the majority of them, they have the kind of skills they cannot use in Zimbabwe. And a development or a consequence of that development is that Zimbabwe civil service, especially now, after Mnangagwa put his clansmen to run these things, the Zimbabwean civil service under Vincent Hungwe is the most incompetent civil service, certainly in the region. But if someone were to do a more proper study in Africa, I wouldn't be surprised if the civil service in Somalia is much more competent than the civil service in Zimbabwe today. It has no skills, no loyalty, It exists in name, and the people that Mnangagwa put there in the early days with all sorts of promises and so forth, they are in hiding now. They are nowhere to be seen to even explain some of the policy inconsistencies or even the consequences of their policy. And this is a serious issue because Zimbabwe used to have one of the best civil services in the region in terms of experience and skill, and in some cases, knowledge. But no one wants to work for that civil service right now. And you cannot have a civil service which is constructed around your clan and expect it to perform. You could have done better. So there's nothing to be gained by taking a concept from America about the deep state and then use it in Zimbabwe. There's no deep state there. Let's try and find an appropriate term to describe it. But whatever term we are going to find, if we work on it, we will not be happy with what is in there. It is one of the major problems of governance in Zimbabwe. It's a civil service that is incompetent, unskilled, and is working elsewhere. Most of those civil servants are, in fact, informal traders. At one time, we thought most of them were farmers, but in fact, most of them are busy sending runners to Messina to buy this or that for resale in Zimbabwe. And it is an area of the Zimbabwean crisis that needs to be packed. But we are unpacked. But we know the good thing is that the Zimbabweans in the diaspora, not only are they supporting that economy, which is the sort of the quandary for them, but it is quite something to be proud of, that most of them are very productive people where they are. They are excelling where they are. And there is no doubt that if the situation were to, the crisis were to be addressed and unlocked, to find a solution, Zimbabwe would benefit from its skills in the diaspora, as it is already benefiting from the resources of that diaspora.
Now, thanks a lot, Prof. Bati Ezimnandiga's Pale. It's been 2 hours, but it looks like it's 30 minutes, and we really loved to go on. We have learned a lot. We have, people are commenting, and the lecture will be there on our Facebook page. We'll load it on YouTube as well. We share the link on Twitter, and we'll share the recording as well. And for that, those who have not been able to join us live, they can go on and listen. But then Professor Moyo, afternoon yakho namuhla isindebele lesikhiwa sokuhlangana nabakalanga kose toboka kwazo. It's been very informative, and we hope to join you on other platforms. We hope also to get the copies of Excel Gate and read and understand the lessons. This has been wonderful. Thank you for those who joined us on live. Thank you for those who joined us on Zoom. At least the professor was not lonely, because he said, you need to share this link. I don't want to be lonely. So at least there were people who were on Zoom. So for those who were joining us this afternoon, thank you very much. This was a lecture by Professor Jonathan Moyo, Unpacking the Zimbabwean Crisis. I hope we learned a lot. He's there on Twitter. You can continue the discussion there, ask some of the questions if you didn't have a chance to ask him here, and I'm sure he'll be willing to engage. My name is Zenzel, and they will follow us on Twitter at site. You can find us on Facebook and on YouTube. I'm back tomorrow with my usual program, The Breakfast Club. Have a good afternoon.